Namaste.
Namaste.
So today we're talking about my bad reputation.
Okay, how long are you gonna be?
I know, we could be here for days. Talking about Jesus' bad reputation. I always thought if I would rewrite this story for people that lived in Milwaukee, I'd write it like this. Philip was from Mequon, the hometown of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We found the one Moses wrote about in the law and the prophets, Jesus, Joseph's son from West Allis." Nathanael replied, "Can anything from West Allis be good?"
Very good. Very good.
And that's kind of what Nazareth wasn't really like West Allis. Nazareth was probably more like West Bend. A backwater town on the trade route, but nothing special. And it's interesting to me as a student of psychology that there's so much that hasn't changed in how we evaluate folks in 2,000 years. That where you're from still makes a difference. As if where you're from has any real impact on who you become as an adult. It might have an impact on who you are as a kid. For example, if you're from Chicago, well, you'd probably be a Chicago Bears fan. But when you came of age,
Get smart.
you could get smart, see the error of your ways, and change. It's not as if that would be, as if that's a determinative factor that you couldn't change. It's not genetics. But while this whole Nazareth thing kind of led me to the idea of reputation, I wanted to talk about reputation really much more in the context of contemporary Christianity and its close cousin, this idea that we need to be kind. The idea, be kind. Yeah, fuck that. Fuck that. A friend of mine with whom I recently reconnected, who was a priest in the UAC in the early days, and who left, used to always say, "Be kind. Be kind," when he sensed that I was getting agitated. Yes, riled up. I was trying to say it in a kind way, so I didn't say riled up as in agitated. But when I want to say, just call a spade a spade. And there is this sort of cultural thing around the church where we must be kind.
Yeah.
We must not offend. And so, for example, I think we might have talked about this Thursday a little bit, the relatively newly elected suffragan Bishop of Maryland went and got herself plastered again. She was DUI the first time in 2010, and her blood alcohol level was 0.22, which is in the neighborhood of professional drunk, is what I used to call it when I worked mental health. I mean,
That's 3 times.
yeah, almost 3 times the legal limit. It's where most of us would be passed out, and yet she could still drive a car, although not well. She was driving and texting and ran over a guy riding a bicycle and killed him, left the scene of the accident. And there's a really good article. There's an Episcopal priest named Ken Howard, who's a friend of mine on Facebook, who I really respect. And for me to say those words together in a sentence, Episcopal priest who I really respect, whom I really respect, actually, it should be. That's quite something, because I don't say that about a lot of people, a lot of Episcopal priests, but he wrote a very good article about it, and that appeared in a little site called the Episcopal Cafe that I don't hang out in, but I go once in a while when there's discussions about things like this. And it's a pretty good site, actually. People write decent blogs. And I had then stumbled across a conversation on Facebook started by another friend of mine who is an Episcopal priest, but I don't think she's active. And I had made the statement that there had to be an error, a big flaw, not just an error, in the search process. Because when somebody runs a blood alcohol of 0.22, you can smell it on them. It's a sickly sweet smell that comes out of their pores. And there is, in the Episcopal Church in particular, a culture of drinking. You know, the old joke, wherever there's 4 Episcopalians, there's a 5th. You know, how many Episcopalians does it make to change a light bulb? One version of that is 2, one to change it and the other makes the cocktails. And you know, there's in the Episcopal Church, there is a heavy culture of drinking. And although not the heaviest percentage of alcoholism, interestingly, the heaviest percentage of alcoholism among denominations is Wisconsin Synod Lutherans.
Yeah, I'm surprised there.
Yeah, not very surprising, but interesting nevertheless. I think it's a corollary to fundamentalist Christians watch more porn than any other branch of any religion.
That's
It's whatever you repress, you know, comes out sideways, so to speak. No pun intended. So anyway, I was saying we need to reevaluate these search processes, and we need to be direct in confronting people who are wandering around with BALs in the 0.2 range, because this is a person who's drinking all day. And if she's hanging out at the diocesan offices, her coworkers can tell. And yet, this culture of be kind takes over. And tragically, the result is a man lost his life. We're more concerned about our reputation than we are doing the right things sometimes. The classic biblical example is Jeremiah. God said to Jeremiah, go get naked. Because Jeremiah was from southern Israel, so he said to say naked. Go get naked and sit by the town wall. And tell the people that this is what is going to happen to you if you don't change your ways. In other words, you'll lose everything. And he was prophetically speaking of the exile that took place in the 500s, which would be the 6th century. I was struggling with that. 6th century BCE, when Israel was conquered not once but twice, and the people were carried off into captivity. And the people of his time said, he's gone crazy, right? Because he's sitting naked by the city wall. The town, when everybody had to pass by the wall, he was kind of by the gate by the wall. And people also lived in the wall, so it wasn't like he was in this isolated spot out in the boonies. He didn't plop down naked, say, in Dousman, you know. He was more like off the main freeway exit downtown, you know. Yeah. Yeah, so down by Grand Avenue. Although maybe that wouldn't be seen as all that unusual by Grand Avenue. Maybe we've got to move it on the other side of the river. On water in Wisconsin.
Yeah, let's suggest that one right there.
Yeah, because there's naked people by Grand Avenue all the time. And you know, it's not that Jeremiah didn't care that he was going to be naked by the wall, but he had the sense that doing the right thing was more important than his reputation. The book of Hosea, the prophets are full of this stuff. God says, go marry a prostitute. And Hosea said, thank goodness somebody would experience.
Yeah.
No. Well, of course, in those times, probably more than today, although still today, anybody who married a prostitute was looked down upon. And yet, Hosea said, doing the right thing here, saying what needs to be said, is more important than my reputation. There's a tradition in Russian Orthodoxy in particular of what's called the starets, S-T-A-R-E-T-Z. It's a holy fool. And I actually, to some extent, see myself in that tradition. I'm not so much claiming holiness as being foolishness from time to time, but that there are times when I think we have to do things and say things that make people uncomfortable in order to draw attention to what's going on and to open their eyes a little bit, shock them into consciousness. And it flies right in the face of our comfort level, our cultural values. There's the story of a Sufi. He was a Sufi holy fool. I forget his name now. It starts with an N. His name's escaping me. But who supposedly went to the bank and wanted to make a withdrawal, and they asked him if he could, prove who he was, and he pulled a mirror out of his pocket and looked at it and said, "Yep, that's me." So, Nasruddin maybe is his name or something like that. Rumi wrote about him and people from that time. How much really in the end, and I think the answer is different for each of us, is our reputation worth if we're left at the end of our lives saying, "Man, I should have said something about that," or "Man, I should have done something about that," or "Man, that was really stupid and I knew it and I kept my mouth shut." So, getting back to the guy, I thought Brad Warner's reading, the first reading, is very interesting because we seem to want to disqualify people who call to attention our blind spots. So Sri Lanka
It's over there.
kicks the woman out for having a Buddhist tattoo, right? And somebody from outside says, "This is ridiculous." And the first thing that folks automatically go to is, well, who's he to say that? In Myanmar, the former Burma, Buddhist monks have taken up arms and have been engaged in violent conflict for years now, in direct contradiction to Buddhist teachings. And yet, when people from the outside try and say, "What are you doing? Who are you to tell us?" And that's always our answer: who are you to tell us? I'm taking some stances and some blog posts that will be published this week, and I have in the past, pretty directly confronting some foolishness in the fallout the unraveling of racial unrest in this country, and some things that people have said that are just plain stupid. And I think somebody has to say something. And everybody doesn't have to say something. I think you have to be kind of a strange person like me, who's willing to say it and let the chips fall where they may and doesn't really care. And recognizes that in doing that, there's some self-limiting that you're doing in terms of where you're going to be invited. I probably won't be invited for dinner down at the Episcopal Cathedral in town anytime soon. Who needs the gas, really? But it's interesting in the Brad Warner story, the assumption that's there, because you're white, you're a privileged American, and he grew up in Kenya and actually lived in Japan for a number of years because he had a great fascination with Godzilla movies. And he worked for companies in Japan that made Godzilla movies and other things like that. He's a punk rocker, and one of my favorite Zen teachers actually. He also wrote a book called "There Is No God, and He Is Always With You," which is just an excellent book. In this story about Jesus, come see Jesus. Jesus is from West Dallas. The people from Mecca go, "Oh, we don't want to see him, Buffet," right? And Jesus says to Nathaniel, thank you, Nathaniel Philip, yes. "Before Philip called you, I saw you under the fig tree." It does not mean he saw him under the fig tree, although there may have been a fig tree. That's a colloquialism from the Hebrew of the time that means, "I saw you studying the Torah." But Jesus wasn't standing there. It's a recognition in Jesus that a holy person is standing there. And it is perhaps, for me anyway, the single sort of bona fide pulling out of the mirror and saying it. Because there's, when you're in the presence of somebody who's done their spiritual work, and I'm not saying they're fully realized, they're awakened, they're enlightened, they're walking the spiritual path, you can feel it. And when they aren't, it doesn't matter how many pretty vestments they have in their closet. You can feel that too. Not that I'm referring to anybody in particular. I'm referring to a lot of people in general. And so, that's the criteria. And the interesting thing, I think, is that takes one to know one applies. I think when we're first starting the spiritual path, we're fooled by externals. There's a story that Noah Levine tells. I do this because he does this. But never mind. Noah Levine tells a story. He's an insight meditation teacher, the son of Stephen Levine, who's the author of that book we wrote. Noah's all tatted up, right? He's another punk rock Buddhist teacher. And his teacher is Jack Kornfield. So he's in the insight meditation tradition where people wear street clothes and not robes. And he took a friend to this conference where there were a bunch of teachers there, and Sharon Salzberg and Jack Kornfield. One guy who had the hair knotted on top of his head and was wearing all the robes and had the really long beard trying to do the Hindu thing, who Noah knew had just gotten off a 20-year crack binge. And he was the only one there in all the robes. Well, what does Noah's friend say at the end of the evening? Did you see that guy in the robes? Man, was he powerful spiritually. Because, this is me interpreting this, not Noah, he was at that place on his journey where he was fooled by that. He hadn't gone deep enough himself to see that ultimately what you're wearing, or if you're wearing anything at all, if you have a good reason to not be, is no indication of spiritual progress. And that's why reputation is problematic. Because reputation is one of those externals that fools us. How many times have we said to ourselves, how could whoever do that horrible thing? Why, he's a leader in the community, a leader at his church. Well, it's because you're fooled by externals. And it cuts both ways. If we are to go deeper spiritually, we have to drop the value on reputation as it applies to us and as we apply it to others. We need to get to the place where we start looking at ideas for their own merit. I got blocked from the conversation about the suffragan bishop and the discernment process because I was asking questions about what do we need to do here. And there were other people who were more concerned. There were other people who were more concerned that we might hurt the little feelings of the people who are involved in those kinds of search processes. So again, reputation became more important than truth. And that's why I really believe this story is one of the most important stories in the gospel. Because in truth, for all I make fun of them, whether you're from Stalis, or Cudahy, or West Bend, or Mequon, doesn't really mean anything. But it's useful to us because it calls our attention and calls our awareness to those biases that we all hold, both